and welcome to A Girl, a Guy, and a Buffy podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Charles.
Hey, and this is your other host, Kate.
How's it going, Kate?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. Wow, it has been a season.
It has. Yeah, to it, but I'm excited about today's topic.
Yes, because sort of culminates everything that we've been talking about in one
Right.
way or the other, and wrapping up our season of our big bad discussion of pop culture.
Yeah, we're all discussing pop culture, and so this is one element of pop culture, fan culture.
Right, because I couldn't do it without the fans. This award is for the fans. It's all for you. We do it for the fans. It's all for you. Um, so as fans, we like to take credit for all of the things. We join fandoms, we take sides. Um,
Yeah,
you know,
I think we're pretty important. We're pretty cool.
yes. It is a huge part of the viewing experience of anything. And also I think it's become more so in recent years, like the importance of the fandom and how a show is marketed, how a show is presented, and the life of the show afterwards.
Yeah.
So for us, it was like, what is fan culture? So what does that mean to you, Kate? Like,
Yeah, so when I was prepping for this episode and doing some research, I found a couple definitions online, and it's funny because this is one of those things where you kind of think you know the definition. So when I found these formalized definitions that were coming out of particularly like sociological research, it was basically exactly what you thought it was.
right,
It wasn't one of those things where you read it and you get like a more nuanced definition than what you might have in your mind. It was like exactly what you think fan culture and fandom is. And that is basically groups of people who are passionate about something. One of the interesting things I did read that I hadn't really thought about is in the sociological definitions that fan culture is a subcategory of participatory cultures.
yes,
So that involves it's not just being a fan, but it's like actively engaging in something, which I thought was a really great description because it is just more than like really loving something. There's a whole world built around engagement, meeting people, whether that's going to conventions, meeting online, just your group of friends who happens to be really into it. So I love the idea that it's more than just like, oh, I watch this thing and I love it. It's like, no, I'm like actively engaged in that fandom.
yeah, I think we might have read the same article.
Probably
We
did. I
might
kind of
we
feel like
might
I saw
have,
the same definition in a couple of places, and I think it pulled from like this
which
original source.
Yeah, which I really liked because the article that I read I thought was really sort of well thought out, and this idea of
Yeah,
participatory cultures, because you're right, like we think about like a sports fan or a music fan or fan of, but there is a difference between a fan of like media culture
right.
versus those other types of culture, and that difference being in that people who are involved in media culture, i.e. television, movies, things like that, are often the creators of new content
Yep.
that expresses the fandom, as opposed to like a sports fan who's like, yeah, I'll wear the jersey and all of that stuff, but they're not typically creating like highlight reels of
Right.
of the plays of the week and things like that. But I will say it did sort of spark something for me when we started talking about like what that fandom is and that differential of the
Hmm.
fan, because I was like, you know what, yes, there's all this like media culture, nerd culture, Dragon Con, Comic Con, all of those things,
Right.
but does that exist in other uh, avenues or other like areas where there are fan bases? Are there other sort of conventions like that?
Right.
And so I decided to do some research and do some digging, and there is, and this is really new as of 2023, that there's Fantasy Sports Con now,
Oh, yeah, I could see that.
where it's like where I think there will be like athletes there to like sign autographs and do all of that stuff, but there's like sports commentators there and live podcasting that's happening, at these events and panel discussions. And then like for music fans, there is uh here in Atlanta, there's A3C Festival and Conference, which
Hmm.
is also sort of the same thing where, it's for like new and upcoming artists, but it is a way for artists to meet each other and they have panels and things like that, and a way for them to get their music out. And so it's a little bit different because I think the need is different, but it is a way for those people of like mind to get together and to sort of express their fan. And then of course there's Broadway Con, um,
Yes.
as a
Yeah.
way as a musical, musical theater sort of situation. So there are other fandoms that do sort of exist, but I don't think they still have the same weight and same pull that sort of media slash nerd culture does.
It's definitely out there, probably as the most prominent, media fandom, media culture. But, I think about, like, I have a friend who's into car culture. I mean, they go to
Mm,
shows, they'll bring cars, like there's ways that they engage very similar to like fandoms
yeah.
of pop culture and media culture. So, it definitely expands beyond that, beyond sort of the obvious, comic book culture, movie culture, TV culture, fandom culture. But one of the interesting things that was in that piece, where we probably both read about defining fandom culture and participatory culture, I really liked some of the points they made about participatory culture, and they're saying it's specifically one that consists of relatively low barriers to our
Hmm.
artistic expression and civic engagement, strong support for creating and sharing one's creations with others, some type of informal mentorship in which the most experienced members pass along their knowledge to novices,
Hmm.
members who believe their contributions matter, and members who feel some degree of social connection with one another and care about other members' opinions about their contributions.
Yes.
And I think that's what's like so great about fandoms. I mean, like anything else, there can be conflict within it.
Hmm.
Like nobody's saying it's, everyone, it's kumbaya, we get along all the time. But I do think there's a lovely sense of community, coming together, sharing something we all love, like helping the new people along if they're new to it, which, is really comes across in this definition and categorization of or of participatory culture. So that 10 times fast.
Right.
Which I think is why it exists and they keep growing and it's so strong, because it is such overall like a positive, lovely aspect of people's passions.
Right. And there's no gatekeeping of that information, and there's no
Right.
gatekeeping of the, of fandom information or information about it. In fact, I think it's, one of the things that you want to do is you want to show how much of a fan you are by expressing your knowledge and like, well, did you know this thing about this? Oh, well, I read this thing. Like it's kind of the status symbol to like know as much as possible about this thing and to be like a huge geek on any one topic.
Yeah.
Which I which I think is great. Like you're now that you're celebrated for your knowledge base. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And I love what you said about like there's no gatekeeping. I think that is like the one thing that the internet changed, because
mhm,
pre-internet, it was there was a lot of gatekeeping, not intentionally. It's just that was the sort of mass communications we had. It was not the open internet. It was mainly being done through like small local groups and then fan magazines known as fanzines.
mhm.
So when you have somebody publishing a specific zine or some sort of newsletter that was mailed out, I mean, so obviously the information was being controlled just by the nature of the medium.
Right.
And the internet changed all that. And I think that's also why you see fandoms being much more diverse.
Mhm.
It's both that like people realize, oh my God, there's so many more people out there that are into the same thing I am. But it's also like, oh, we don't have a small group of people controlling this anymore. So like I can connect with, you know, this subgroup within this, passion within this fan culture over here, because whether it's because we're geographically connected, language connected, racially connected, ethnically connected, whatever it is, like I think it's easier to find those groups even within a certain fan culture.
Well, and with the advent of having all of this access to information, and social media and all of those things, you start to see how the idea of what a fandom looks like, um, is very different. Because when you think of geek culture and when you think of that stuff, you tend to like the sort of image that pops up is like a cisgendered, like heterosexual white male,
Yeah,
and that's not what fandom is. And one of
right.
the great things that I loved discovering about, um in reading this was, Star Trek was one of the first ones to sort of like launch modern day fandom, right?
Right.
And so there's the first Star Trek convention was organized by women.
Oh,
And
I
so
love that.
this is like the one of the best things that I've ever heard. It's gross but also hilarious at the same time, because it tracks. So these women put together the Star Trek convention, and it was a lot of women there and women in costume and doing all of that stuff. And men started showing up because there were women there.
Of course.
Because they were like, "Ooh, women. We can go meet women and talk to women about Star Trek." And so I think this idea that like men men shaping culture, especially fan culture, is really a misnomer, because a lot of fan culture is predominantly, um, female driven, especially when you start looking at like fanfic,
Right. And
and
like
writing and all of those and
videos.
videos
Yeah.
and stuff like that. It's a lot of women driving those things.
Yeah.
And I think that's really I think it's an important distinction to make,
Yeah.
because you start to shift the lens of how we look at the fandoms, and not only how we look at the fandoms, but how we look at the product in which we are fans of.
Mm. Yeah. That's a really good point. Yeah. So I have a
Gosh.
question for you.
Okay.
What was your first fandom that you were into, or like how did you get into it? Either pre or during internet age? Like
Oh gosh.
what was it and how did you engage?
So here's the thing, right? It's so hard because growing up in the 80s,
Mhm.
it felt like like I was a fan of everything, because I was such a consumer, like a voracious consumer of media content and television. And like I mean I remember one year, like the movie Clue, I'm such a huge fan of, and I do remember one summer, for like a summer project that I did just for myself, I had recorded the movie, off of TV, because that's what you did.
Yeah.
And then I sat and spent like several weeks over the summer transcribing the film into a notebook and like writing out the script by
Yeah.
hand. Because I was like, I want to write out every single line, and this is what. Yeah. So, I think those were the things. I was never really. I always wrote my own short stories, but I never really engaged in fanfic
Yeah.
or creating fanfic.
What was the first one you would say then you engaged in the internet digital age? And like did
Uh,
that change? Like did the internet change things for
it
you?
definitely changed. And I think the development of it and looking at, I think it was more so, uh, I think it really was Sarah Michelle Gellar. Like, I really think it
Hmm.
was her who, like, when I saw her in Swan's Crossing, and I was like, oh my gosh, she's great. And just became sort of enamored by what she was putting on there. And so then when she moved to All My Children, I followed her and was like, "Ooh, I like this." So I became a fan of hers.
Yeah.
And so then I started to consume her content, and then that led to like, well, let me get to the soap opera digest and let me see what's going to
Right.
happen here. And then doing a little bit more digging into like the behind the scenes of how things were going. And so it wasn't, I mean, I think when we start looking at Buffy is when I really started to really get involved. Social media definitely changed how um, how I engage with the fandom, and I was able to connect with more people and do all of that stuff. And now with TikTok, um, you know, and putting out this podcast, I mean, I think that's really sort of engaged even more. I will say those DVD box sets though were great. Like
Yeah.
those commentaries and having that, like that
So
just felt
good.
like a whole new level of access that was like, oh, thank you. This is so great. I love that. And then, going on YouTube and trying to find all of that stuff. I mean, it can become
A
not
rabbit hole.
obsessive, but a rabbit hole for sure. That I will spend hours doing it, and like
Yeah.
and seeing the creativity, especially now, seeing the creativity of some of the content creators on TikTok who are doing like the Buffy talk stuff is so fun,
Yeah.
and it's just another way to express love for a show and also express how you feel about the show and how you feel about yourself in relationship to the show on
Mm-hmm.
any given day.
Yeah.
What about you? What was your
I mean, I guess technically it would be soap operas. Like I got turned on at like around 5 years old to a soap by my mom, as like I feel like so many women of my generation would probably say that. Either by a mother or grandmother, aunt, somebody, some other woman in their family who's also like into soap operas. You almost like inherit the family soap operas until you maybe like branch out and discover your own. And that was definitely my case. And then as I got older and I like, yeah, I was buying like soap opera digests and I was writing to like my favorite actors and getting their headshots back, which I didn't even know was a thing until like I got the first one back and I was like, oh, this is amazing. But like you said, it was very passive. I mean, I had a couple friends, we'd like who were into the soaps and we might talk about it, but it was pretty much just like me being into it and like
Mhm.
obsessing about it and like reading, the magazine articles and being like, oh my God, is so and so really gonna break up or blah blah blah, whatever this twist is. But I would say like the first fandom that I kind of gotten involved in, and this would just be like within my immediate social circle where we like were so into it, was Heathers, the movie Heathers. And this
Mm,
came out when I was in middle school, like to the point where like a group of my friends and I one year like went as different Heathers and Veronica uh for Halloween. Like
mm.
actually went out and like bought an outfit. I was Shannon Doherty's Heather. I can never remember all the last names. Which it was really funny because I kind of wanted to be the lead Heather. And my one of my friends who had a very like strong personality, in a Heather way, but she wasn't mean. Basically, was like took that role, like grabbed it, and I was a little resentful, kind of like Shannon Doherty's Heather. And I mean, it was really funny, but
Life
I was like,
imitating art.
I know exactly. And I forget like who of my other friends was the other Heather and Veronica. And it's funny, I didn't even like, you would think in some ways you want to be like Veronica because she gets to like stand out. But I was like, I think I felt mad that she like just made the decisions without us like discussing it. But I was in the end, I was really happy because I put together like this super cute green outfit and I was like super happy with but we used to quote that movie all the time.
Oh my
It
gosh.
was like our religion. And my parents, I remember being like, my parents couldn't understand why we liked that movie. And I was like, how can you not understand? It's the greatest movie ever made. And now, like having gone back and watched it as an adult, I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, I get why my parents didn't get it.
No, still greatest movie ever made. So great.
No,
Um,
it is, but I get like as an adult, like if that was the first time you're seeing it, like you
right,
don't connect to it as much. It is very much like you understand it as a teenager in a totally different way. So it was really
right.
funny. I was like, all right, I get it. Um, but so yeah, but really like the first for me delving into it in a much more engaged way, like talking to other people, like you said, falling down the rabbit hole. And this happened because of the internet, was the first TV version of La Femme Nikita that aired in the late
Mm,
90s on USA. I was online and I guess I was like, I don't know what I was searching for or doing related to the show. Like, I don't know if I was digging for info or like, I don't remember. I just remember somehow I fell into message boards related to
Mm,
the show. And it was like not only just like fandom message boards that were had people who were making the show. So it was like
hmm.
an early Twitter.
Yeah.
There one of the production assistants had his own like website and message board, and he would like come in every once in a while and like comment or like answer questions, but then the rest of the time it was like fans talking to each other and debating. And then I discovered another one with one of the producers from the show, and he would like come in, answer questions. But again, most of the time it was just like fans talking to each other. But it was like a cool group of fans because it was still relatively small and people were still like discovering the internet. It was so much fun. I loved it to the point where I was a little sad when like the internet grew so big and like message boards kind of went away because it didn't feel as connected
Hmm.
anymore.
Yeah.
And I missed that. But yeah, that was really fun. And then that led me down like a rabbit hole of again, I like clicked on a link on a like La Femme Nikita site and it led me to fan fiction and I was like, what the hell is this? And I was lost. I was like down the rabbit hole. I even like started writing because I read a couple and I was like, I can write better than which is I will say there are so many writers out there who just like write for passion,
Hmm.
write fanfic that are like unbelievable writers.
Right.
Like they could be professional writers if they chose to like tell their own story, news stories. And I know some people do, but some people just love writing for their fandom. And I was like,
Right.
I appreciate and I love it because like you were such a good writer and you're like it's fun to delve into the like what ifs, like the places that the show is particularly in television that the show is limited by
Right.
because you only have so much time. You only have, the creator of the show has a direction that they want the season to go in, which is great. But so you can't. It's not like choose your own adventure. You can't take every offshoot. So I love that about like fan fiction and, and then the fact that people are making videos and artwork. I mean, amazing artwork and it's really cool that this other art, which is basically to me what art should do, is inspire you to create something else, like whatever that
Right.
is. For us, it's creating a podcast.
Yeah. I mean, and the amount of, I think the amount of time that we spent, and again, it's the next level of participatory where it goes
Yes.
from, just watching and just doing that to creating something new based on this thing. Um, and I don't know, one of the things that I feel like I found hilarious, and I don't know if you saw this in that article, which I think we should probably give mention to since we have referenced it so much.
Yeah, well, and
Uh,
we'll see if we're talking about the same article.
I know. So it's subcultures and sociology from Grinnell College.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we'll
Yes,
again, like always, we'll put links to our sources in the show notes.
because it's really a great article and a great
Yeah.
read. But one of the things I found in there was and I think this is something that's been around for a while, but this was the first time that I had seen it, was the geek hierarchy. Um, and it's just talking
Yes.
about sort of the levels of geekdom. And in the article, it's hard to see, so I had to do some digging to actually see what it is. But it's basically a hierarchy of like
Oh yeah.
this person is a geek. It's like a self-proclaimed geek, but this person is more geeky than this person. And so it starts with like authors of science fiction novels, but then it goes all the way down to like furries who dress in furry costumes, who write fanfics about something and put themselves in their fanfic in their furry costume, are like the geekiest of geeky people. It was so funny and it was such a clever, I think it's just a clever way of like how you can go down um you know the rabbit hole of being a geek. Like someone who
Yeah.
is enjoys Star Trek is a geek, but someone who enjoys Star Trek but also speaks Klingon is geekier than that. And then a person who gets married in their Star Trek uniforms is geekier than that. So I think it's interesting to see these sort of like different levels.
Yeah.
And you can exist in all of them, and I think it's so fun to be able to sort of move around and like some things just I think it's exciting that there's to create something that tickles your brain in such a way that it inspires you to like get off your ass and do something.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
and that I,
absolutely.
and I don't, and quite frankly, I don't know if I mean, sports fans do, they like get off their ass and go to a game, but a lot of, so I don't know. I think it's a really,
Yeah,
it's
it's
an
just probably
exciting time.
a different way of engaging in building camaraderie, and there might not be the like creating their own art aspect of it, but
Right.
I'm sure there's some sort of element to it. I mean, I say that as because I am not a sports person and I do not have
Right.
sports people in my
I just
life.
can't imagine someone sitting around like making like montages of like the Green Bay Packers like in the end zone. I mean, you see sports shows doing that all the time, but I don't
Right.
see. But maybe there are people out there who are doing it, and that just because that's not the fandom that I'm a part of. So, if there are sports people out there who are also Buffy people who are listening to this, I would love to see your sports fan art or
Yeah,
your
absolutely. I,
sports fanfic. Like, I mean, you have fantasy football, which is kind of like
yeah.
the closest thing that you would get to,
Yeah.
um, writing your own fanfic is like putting your team together and you're like, oh, I would love to see somebody's sports fanfic.
I know. I feel like there's like everything out there under the sun. There has to be like something out there. I will say, since we're talking about, kind of sports versus media fandom, that for a long time, I would say in the culture that sports fandom was looked on as like quote unquote normal,
Hmm.
and that, media fandom was looked on as weird, nerdy, geeky in a negative sense. And that has been a massive shift
Right.
in the last 20-25 years. And I think that's where the internet definitely made a difference,
Hmm.
because you realized there was more people out there and more people found themselves and more people fell into it, like myself. Like I didn't even realize I was a part of any kind of fandom that way, because I didn't know about fanzines or newsletters or, anything like that. And even if there was ones for the fandom I was into, which there probably weren't. Um, so I think that's a really great thing about the internet, is that equalization, that it's like, dude, whatever you're into, be into it. That's cool. Like it's no longer, for the most part, looked down on. I mean, certainly more mainstream fandoms, there might be like subcultures that people quote unquote, in mainstream America would look down on. But I think there's a lot more acceptance across the board, by people who are not into any fandom.
Although
I
we
don't know.
haven't really talked much about Buffy themselves and the Buffy fans
No,
themselves.
but good transition. But before we transition, I have one thing that I wanted to share because I thought this was really great. Because
Okay.
I feel like the presumption is there's a lot of negativity and unhealthiness around fandoms. Like you
Mm,
think of like a crazed fan, or, I mean, the fact that
yeah.
like the word in culture is, particularly like it came out of the millennial generation, but as using the word stan from the Eminem song
Yeah.
as like you're a super fan, but like in the song that character is obviously not a good person, or he's going through something. I'm not going to armchair diagnose like a mental illness, but that's you definitely get the feeling from it. And then he ends up killing his girlfriend,
Right.
in the song. And so you're like, well, do you really want to use that term as like to like be
Right.
like
That's the
show
thing
that
to
you're a fan of something? Yeah, because in this case it's like a very negative context. But I found this great article in the Guardian that really talked about like psychologists and psychological studies saying kind of the opposite. That that basically, just to read from a piece from the article, it says, well, every fandom has its extreme fringes. In the vast majority of cases, being a fan, and particularly being part of a fandom, appears to have a remarkably positive influence on people's lives.
Mhm.
Gail Stever, who has been studying the psychology of celebrity for more than three decades and has interviewed thousands of fans about their past passions, says she has largely found them to be, quote, normal people carrying on normal lives, end quote, who view their relationship with their idol as similar to an important friendship or a special hobby. Which I was like, I love hearing that because I do think we're finding that's more and more true. If there is a negative story or outcome from a fan, that makes like that resonates big time in news and it sticks in our brains. But then you have to remember, like, it's not that often it happens. Thankfully,
Right.
um, and so I think that's really fantastic. And it also goes on to say that it's basically like kind of fulfills this need to be a part of a group,
Hmm.
and to have community. And it's just sort of a modern day version of doing that.
Yeah, it is
And
this sort of
it's
wholesome.
a very healthy thing to have.
Hmm. Um, and talking about that, it made me like flashback to when you were talking about Stan and this idea of like being a Stan of something, and I completely flashed back to Rebecca Schaefer, who was the actress
Oh yeah.
that on like an 80s sitcom called My Sister Sam,
Yeah.
who was had a stalker and was murdered, and it was because of that that all these laws got implemented into all these like new stalker laws got put into place, because before that there wasn't any. And so I think, like, yeah, when we're talking about sort of the difference between sort of this extreme idea versus um just a regular fan, like someone who is like a part of the fandom who has a passion for it, but I think there's a mental health component to there's a healthy mental component to
Yeah.
being a part of a fandom, where you start to, which is why that idea of like, well, I stand for it. I mean, I think we sort of take the power, people are sort of taking the power away from that, but I think you're right that there can be somewhat of a danger in going too far. And I think like people, and we see it today even online, where people have where there's divides between celebrities and people take sides, and
Yeah.
and they and what ends up happening is that things are said by people who don't know what they're talking about, or things
Yeah.
are said about people who truly have no invested interest in the story. They just want to be a part of it, and it can feel sometimes unhealthy. And it certainly doesn't serve your fandom, and it doesn't serve the person that you're trying to stand up for, I don't think, either.
Yeah. I mean, I think anything where you start to like connect it to your identity, that can happen. I mean, because you could say the same thing about politics. I mean, to me,
Sure.
it's no different than that. I haven't seen anything that said this. This is just like me and using my like intuition and life experience to make this estimated guess. But I would guess a lot of moments of negativity and anything related to potential stalking, going to that extreme end of fandom. I would guess that those individuals are actually in isolation
Hmm.
for whatever reason, like they're
Yes.
not actually a part of the larger fandom, like engaging with people, whether it's online or in person. I think that leads to a lot more issues when you're isolated.
I would agree, yeah. And so I think like being a part of a fandom and being a part of a community and having the internet as a way to like access that community, especially
Yeah.
when you are so isolated, could really be a huge benefit in finding community and finding self. Um and and what I have heard, and we heard this from other celebrities and things like that all the time, talking about, oh, your show saved my life and all of these things. And I
Right.
think that serves true as the fandom too, because you can become sort of an extended family with people that you can talk to about things outside of the fandom that are a part of your personal life, because there's a baseline of trust already.
Right. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. So very, very true.
Yeah, because I think like and I think it was in the Evan Katz book,
Mhm.
into every generation, where he's talking about um when you meet somebody who's a fan of Buffy, Like there's a like when you're like, oh, you like Buffy too? Oh, okay,
Hmm.
great. I already know where you're coming from. Like there's a sense of
Yes.
like, I already know you because I know the type of people who watch it. And so you already have some points with me if you watch
Right.
Buffy.
Right. 100%. I actually had that happen with a mutual friend of ours. Uh, we were kind of just getting to know each other. She was working for a theater and kind of wanted to pick my brain, not about anything related to her job, but about my job working for a women's organization because she was really passionate about women's issues. And we were out for drinks, just chit-chatting. And I was making a point to her, and I was like, something from Buffy popped into my head. So I was like going to use it as like the analogy. And I looked at her and I was like, have you ever watched Buffy? And she was like, oh, yeah. And I was like, great. We're going to be best friends for life. Let me use this. And I like pulled it out and she totally understood what I was talking about. Whatever I used from Buffy. I don't even remember what the example was, but I was like, we were like cemented from then on.
There's a shorthand. Being a part of a fandom
Yes.
creates a shorthand
Yes.
for people, which I think is amazing. I love
I
it.
That's a great way to describe it. I love that. Yeah, 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 absolutely. So should we move on to Buffy fandom particularly?
I mean, yeah, if we're talking about great fans,
I know.
I don't see why
Um,
not.
yeah. So I again, doing some research just to kind of talk about the greater Buffy fan culture and kind of and how it got started aside from our personal interactions with it and our personal love of the fandom. But it's interesting because Buffy was not the first, but it was definitely one of the early television shows to tap into internet fan culture. And I think to some degree it was built into the show, whether that was intentional or not, because Joss Whedon himself comes from a love of comic books, and there's a built-in fandom to that. And so I think that helped. One of the reasons why this very culty show on a relatively small show on a small network has had such longevity and has such a like significant fandom is because of how the show was built itself. You had like the serialization, which is what we know why people get hooked on soap operas. I mean, that's why I watched soap operas from like age of 5 through college. You just it kept bringing you back each day, each week because you were like, oh my god, I have to know what happens between X character and Y character, and that was true of Buffy. Um, in some ways, I think actually being a small show on a small network, that you feel that like, oh, I'm one of the cool people watching this awesome show that like media people are talking about, like Entertainment Weekly is talking about it, but like not the rest of the world. So I feel like I know I've got the inside scoop on this like super cool show. The language built into the show, like you understand that language and you can speak it with other people. And then I think the music, I mean, it's ironic because I don't remember if it was a commentary or an interview, but like Joss Whedon said, part of the reason they had like all these indie bands from LA was just because that's all they could afford. They weren't
Right.
big name bands yet. So that's who they would bring to the bronze. But like that built in coolness and
Hmm.
into the show. So I think all of that really helped come together at the time that, internet fandom culture was being built as well.
Yeah, and also the clothes too, and just like the
Yeah.
clothes and the dress and all of that, really sort of spoke to everyone at the time because they were like because it was like very accessible clothing too. It was like you're cool and hip, but I feel like I could get that at like a Forever 21 if I really wanted to. Like I could
Yeah.
go to the mall and actually find an outfit that was similar to what you were wearing. So not only could I sound like you, but I could look like you, and I
Yeah.
could also like listen to the same type of music and
Right.
build a world around all of that stuff.
Yeah.
I think too, also one of the things that to sort of piggyback on what you were saying about sort of the idea of building fandom into the culture, and I think we do see that because there was an essay that I was reading that was really that started to talk about um Andrew as a fan of the show and this idea of like the character of Andrew being this lens now that we're like at the end of the series and then putting in a character into the show that is kind of an outsider and is now looking in and is like a part of the Scooby Gang now, kind of, sort of, but not really, and really exploring and really getting into it and fanboying out over, when we get to storyteller, like this is such a great example. Like that's the whole thing. Like he's telling the story, but he's telling it from a fanboy point of view. Like he is fanboying out over Buffy and like the woman who defeated him, and and he's on his path to redemption, and he's finally like this is his fanfic, and he finally gets to get put back into this. He's putting himself back into the story in a way, and it's just like this idea that then we as an audience also get to experience that fandom through a character in the show, which creates this whole like meta adventure of experiencing fan life while the show is still going on.
Yeah, that's a really excellent point. I never thought of Andrew from that perspective, but that makes a lot of sense. I think too, it's interesting because, you know, of Andrew's age and, so many fans being of similar age when they watch the series, whether it was at that time or they come to it years later, but around the same age as the characters. Like so many people at that age, you're still trying to figure out who you are. And Andrew very much was trying to figure out who he was. And that's why he was so easily malleable. So it is really interesting because I think when you are that age, fandoms can help you find who you are.
Right.
So that again, it's almost like again this what's the creature that eats his own tail, the Orubus? It's kind of that same thing. It's like the cycle keeps going, gets like super meta when you think of Andrew in that way. But I love
Yeah.
that. That's a great way to like see Andrew's role in particularly in season 7.
Yeah, because he it and we see it too in Slayer's a Buffyverse story too. Like we see it
Yeah.
from Adira.
Oh,
Adira is like the ultimate fangirl in the subreddits and
totally.
like is like, yes, I can't believe I'm finally here. Um and I think
That
that
was like we talked about it in that episode, but it's still
yeah,
like one of my favorite parts of that. Just because it feels so right for the series, like as
mhm,
far as the show, but then again, also it made like exposition that much easier because we didn't have to
right,
bring her up to speed.
right. And it's so funny too, and it's like, and these examples, I'm gonna like jump Buffy for a moment just because we talked about this briefly
Yeah.
but the episode of Supernatural, where Dean and Sam go to a supernatural convention, and they have to, and again, this is a spoiler alert for anyone who's watching Supernatural. Y'all, I haven't watched Supernatural. I just happened to like be doing research, and this episode came up in my research, so I watched the episode. It was a great episode. I really loved it. And the thing that I really liked about it was how meta it was. Like it was so meta, and then at the end it had like this lovely poignant message of they see, like, because Dean is basically saying to these guys who are like fanboying and like cosplaying as he and his brother, he's like, like the supernatural books are not fun. It's not fun. It sucks. We have to deal with this stuff all the time, and it's terrible, and Dean and Sam have to deal with these ghosts and this trauma all the time. It is not fun. It's not cool at all. And then at the end, when the guys like who are like think it's all pretend and then figure out that it's real, and then they're talking to Dean at the end and they say, I think you've got it wrong. It is cool because you get to like, this is what I like. I don't do anything important for work. Like I sell paper or whatever, and I do this. And he was like, we don't do anything that's super important, but what you get to do is that you get to save the world every day, and you get to do that with someone who would give their life for you. And how cool is that? That you have such purpose in your life. And I think it's interesting that the fan can give perspective to a product, to an idea,
Hmm.
to the art form that maybe those in the creation of it don't see, which I think is why it's so kind of humbling when fans go, this saved my life, because it's more than just this.
Yeah.
It gives me perspective on the world as a whole and my world. And so
Yeah.
you really get a chance to sort of really see that from a different perspective.
Yeah. No, I think it's really true. Kind of tying into that, actually, another article I found, which again we'll link to because it was a summation of a couple of articles writing on this topic. So it was talking about an article in Self magazine and then had updated a few years later when there was another article on the same topic in The Atlantic.
Mhm.
But it's something called superhero slash geek therapy. And it was therapists that were using their clients or favorite thing that, they're something related to
Oh
geekdom or
yeah.
superhero-dom that would help them in therapy. And so there actually was a Buffy example, and it was like an amazing example to show you to show exactly what you're talking about. And the woman who was the client had been sexually assaulted
Mhm.
and, was having trouble articulating her feelings about it, articulating the situation. And so I guess but she was a fan of Buffy. And so the therapist had her, I think they watched some episodes together, if I remember correctly. And there's a moment in season 6 where Buffy, and I can't remember who she was talking to, but she basically talks about like everything hurts. I think she was talking to Spike. And it was
Mhm.
basically like, you know, it's basically like I'm so raw
Mhm.
emotionally that just like everything hurts. I don't want to be here. And the way Buffy describes how she's feeling, the client looked to her therapist and was like, this is exactly how I feel. This is
Mm.
like nails what I'm feeling. And I was like, that is amazing. That was the end to helping her kind of achieve a breakthrough.
Right. That.
And that's all they talked about. Like, so I obviously don't know any more about this client, but I thought that was, I mean, again, what you said, like you just don't know how this will impact. And I think such a show that was so concerned with its characters and the emotions of its characters,
Mhm.
it's not a surprise that so many people have connected with it and found it impacted their lives and helped change or save their lives in many ways.
Right. And we keep talking about it and we keep saying how impactful the show is, and it's for all the show's flaws and things that it has. And we talked, last season we talked about like how traumatizing, like just growing up in Sunnydale is a
Yeah.
traumatic event. Like
Yeah.
like, existing in Sunnydale at any given point in time is is traumatic. And so, but and the fact that they go through all of these traumatic events without any sort of like time to process or grieve or to properly do anything before they have to face the next thing, which is something that we're all like, oh gosh, we really wish we want that for the characters. and
Yeah.
and the more we talk about it and the more I hear it in fandoms and stuff like that, which I think is great, because that means we want it for ourselves,
Yeah.
because we recognize that these people who are not real
Right.
need this. Therefore, we can make the one to one and go, well, if they need it for all of this, then surely I need it
Right.
for my monster of the week. Like,
Right.
what's the deal? And so you get that. And I think that's the beautiful thing about Buffy, that it's done so well, is that it has given you the language to use, and
Hmm.
it's given you, and it's given you a soundscape, and it's given you uh, a place to exist, and a safe space to exist, so that you can figure out and use those tools to go, oh, okay, well, I don't like this. I don't like how Xander's treating. Oh, well, this will never do. Like the amount of Xander slander that like is exponentially going up because people are realizing this is not how you treat
Right.
people. And so I think it's great that if you can recognize it in fiction, in that safe space, then you can recognize it for yourself.
Yeah. That's a really great point. Yeah.
Oh, Buffy fans, we love you.
I know. We love this fandom.
It is great. It is really a great fandom, and I do.
Yeah.
And again, I'm just a shout out to like the Buffy Talk fans are out there. They are awesome. They're really great. It's a really great fan base.
Yeah, it is. Kind of speaking of that, I just think it deserves a little bit of a mention and shout out the history of Buffy fandom, because so much of it really started with two sites online, and that would be the Bronze, which was the official message board on the WB website, and then that started the posting board party, which I remember learning about that when I got into Buffy fandom. And I was like, because I believe it only took place in LA. And I was like, oh, I wish I lived in LA. I would so want to go. Like, it didn't even dawn on me at that time. I think I would now, but like at that time, I was still so new to like fandom and like what I was willing to do. I was like, when I found out about it, I was like, why didn't I like take a vacation and like go do it? I
Right.
should have. I would have now, but like it didn't even cross my mind. But just to give everyone who wasn't watching or into Buffy at that time, or fandom culture back in the days that Buffy aired actually on the WB and UPN. So like we said, the Bronze was the official um, message board, and the posting board party, or PBB, for short, was born as a yearly get together over President's Day weekend. So actually, funny enough, right around the time we're recording this, that grew even larger after actors and writers from both Buffy the Vampire Slayer and its spin-off series Angel started to attend as well. And I got that from the early days of Buffy fandom on Geek Frontiers. So basically, it was kind of probably the first BuffyCon.
Yeah.
Really, when you think about it, and I can understand how it like would start in LA because you're where the show is shooting. So obviously that was easy for like actors and writers to show up. And then the other one, of course, is Whedon-esque.
Yes, we didn't
Um,
ask.
so that was again started by fans, a website, and it's basically it was like a blog and a message board, and like Joss Whedon started lurking on there, and then when they found that out, they gave him like his own account, and he started posting on there, really kind of using it as like Twitter before Twitter existed, and it became a place to gauge like fan reaction to merchandise that they were thinking about selling. Um, it was a and just fan reaction to what was happening in the show. But of course, it continued on, long after the show had stopped airing. So those are definitely like the OG
Right.
sites for Buffy fandom.
And if I understand, like the bronze is no longer up anymore, but I think
So,
it's been like diverted to a different site or something like that, or
no, so the bronze itself, because that was the official site, like controlled by the WB, it closed and kind of reopened in a format when Buffy moved to UPN.
hmm
But apparently, like the fans that were on it didn't really like it, and didn't it was hard to use, and they just didn't feel like it was the same as the old one on the WB site. So it kind of just died like a natural death from like bad user experience.
mm,
Whedon-esque, they basically took a pause in 2017 when the accusations from Joss Whedon's first wife,
right.
Kai Cole, came out, and were, determining how they wanted to move forward, and decided that they felt that the show was bigger than just the creator,
hmm
and so kept it going, and then eventually shut it down completely and just have their social media now. So they're on Instagram and Twitter.
And
Twitter's, I
Twitter.
think, their main
Yeah,
place.
I follow them on Twitter. I see them there a lot.
Yeah.
Um,
Um, but I never like created an account on Whedon-esque, but like when I learned about it, I definitely would go to it.
mhm.
And it did feel like super cool that like, oh my God, like Joss Whedon is like posting on there. And this was certainly like in the days before social media. Uh, so it wasn't like you had easy ways to connect with creators, writers, actors,
Right.
um, as you do now. And it was a lot more, again, this is not a critique of any celebrity and how they control their social media nowadays, but because it was so new and people were still figuring it out, and I think again because like Joss Whedon was a fellow fan,
hmm
and into fan culture, it felt, I mean, it kind of almost felt like you were just like hanging out with him at the coffee shop, you know?
Right.
It
Yeah.
it didn't feel like there didn't feel that barrier of like big time celebrity person and me random fan situation.
Right. There wasn't that distance.
Right.
There's also buffy-boards.com, which seems to be a pretty active fan board site,
Cool.
with chat rooms and forums and like a lot of media, and like you can get like music and stuff like that. We're not being endorsed by any of these people to say
No, not at
any of these
all.
things.
Like
Um,
I but you know, I think it is important to know the history of fandom in Buffy just because it's such a big part of it. It's
yeah,
such a big part of what built the show. Um and still is today. Like I was looking, and I mean, unfortunately, is you can't get really stats from like YouTube because I was curious to know like how many like videos about anything Buffy related was out there. But of course, it's like I'm sure it's in the like millions. But you
right.
can get like stats on like fanfic. So I was like fanfic.net and AO3, which is archive of our own for those of you don't know. But like as of um, February 13th, 2024, there are over 40,000 stories under the Buffy the Vampire Slayer category on AO3. And on fanfic.net, there is over 51,000 stories. I mean, at one point, like Buffy was like number one or number two. And the fact that we're on fanfic.net, as far as like how many stories, and at the fact that we're 25 years on and it's still like number six as far as like the total number of stories on the site is mind blowing.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
What's do you happen to have the stats of like what's number one on there?
I believe it was Supernatural. Like by a
That's
lot. It's
right.
amazing because like I think Supernatural was like 100 something thousand. And then it was
Okay.
the other one that surprises me. All right, I'm gonna go to fanfic.net because it's a good question. Glee is like number two or three.
That's kind of
That was the
surprising.
one that like blew me away. And this is of course just in the TV category because
Right.
okay, so number no Supernatural is like three times as much. Supernatural is 127,000, and this is as of February 14th 2024. Glee is 108,000. Oh, Doctor Who is
Of course.
76,000, and Sherlock is 59,000. Oh, and then Once Upon a Time is 53,000.
That makes sense. I
Yeah.
would agree with that. The Glee
Yeah.
one is a little surprises me a little ones, but the other ones don't.
Yeah. All I have to say is no offense to Once Upon a Time fans, but like Buffy fans, we got to step up. We got to at least go up to number five. We're 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 only like 2,000 away from that.
Okay, get on it. Start writing that
I know,
fanfic.
start writing. I suppose I could just write like one sentence fanfics and just keep posting them.
We can do. Can my fanfic be a haiku?
You can put poetry on there. That counts. It totally counts.
I'm going to start.
Um,
Okay,
yeah.
fans,
So,
let's start writing our Buffy haikus and see what we get. And the fact
oh,
that
and
you
then
can.
like I went to Etsy because I was like curious
Oh
how much
yeah.
stuff. There are 76 pages of Buffy items. Like I just put in the search Buffy the Vampire Slayer and I was like, how many pages I'm gonna get? And it took me a while to like get to the end, but it was 76 pages. I was like, that's
Wow.
mind blowing.
And you went through all 76 pages, and you went
Well,
through,
just I mean, I
or
went
did
through to
you?
like see how many pages were. I didn't look at every item. So
Oh, okay.
obviously there could be like repeat stuff, but like it was ran the gamut from kind of a few things, reselling, but most of it was like original creation.
That's cool.
So I was like, that's amazing. I love that. I love
Maybe
this fandom.
I know. I wonder if somebody out there can make us some merch that we can sell on Etsy.
I know. Exactly.
Oh my gosh, it's great. It's fantastic.
Well, I mean, I think that was a good discussion about fandom and fan culture, and we love fandom and fan culture.
And we hope that you are as much of a fan as Buffy as we are, and we hope that you are as much of a fan as our podcast as we are of you. So,
Absolutely. And if you want to share about your fandom experiences, we would definitely love to hear about it. So you can share about that with us by either emailing us at abuffypodcast@gmail.com or on social media. You can follow us on Instagram and Facebook at a Buffy Podcast.
Yes. So let us know about your I would love to know about like your celebrity encounter with like a Buffy cast member. That would be fun.
Definitely. We would
Yeah.
love to hear about that.
Or anything, or just what you like most about the fandom.
Yeah.
So great. Well, this wraps up our second season. This is wild. I can't believe we've been doing this for 2 seasons. So
I know.
We're so excited. Season 3?
Yeah.
I feel like
I don't see why not.
I mean, there's some things
we still got more to talk about.
We do. Yeah, so season 3, yes, and a lot more to come too. So thank you all so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Okay, bye.
Bye.